Hey friends, welcome to another edition of the Tennis and Bagels podcast. This is your host Vanch, and today I'm joined by a special guest. This is one of our post-slam chats with the one and only Steve Flink, a man who needs no introduction by now. So, Steve, how are you today?
Good bunch. It's not this will be fun. We had quite a fortnight over there, and you and I've got quite a bit to talk about.
Yep, this is perfect. The day after a major always feels a little bit. You kind of have a little bit of an emotional hangover because you're so invested in all of these matches for the past 2 weeks, and in the West Coast, you're trying to just get your body clock back, and so you can set back into the routine. But I'm glad we get to do this.
Yeah, so am I. So am I.
Yep. So why don't we start right ahead with the men's final, and we can start big picture stuff with Djokovic. Obviously, there was quite a bit of the first week itself. There was some doubts coming in to this tournament for Novak, even though he'd won Adelaide, he'd saved that match point against Sebastian Corda. He obviously had the lingering hamstring issues, which were very evident in the first three rounds, particularly. But once he sort of
Yes,
overcame that hurdle,
I like your choice of words there. Very evident to you and to me and to anybody reasonable and fair-minded. Why there were skeptics, I don't know, because anybody paying attention to Adelaide, who saw him run wide for the forehand, that's when he hurt the hamstring against Medvedev, knew that there was something going on. And why would he subsequently go to Melbourne and be in the middle of a practice match with Medvedev and apologize because he had to stop? And then all the things that followed and the medical timeouts in the early first three rounds, especially the second and third round, really. I mean, it's ludicrous for anybody to have doubted him. And for those who thought it was some sort of gamesmanship, it's ridiculous because he doesn't have any need. When you're that good, you don't need that stuff, and you don't need this kind of aggravation either. So I like the way you phrase that.
yeah, for sure. And you could really see it, especially he lost that second set to Enzo Quaco in the second round. And then he took another medical timeout in the third round, I think, against Dimitrov, and he's up in all these matches. So
Yeah,
it
he
makes
had two. He had two against Dimitrov because he did it at the
yeah,
end of the first set and again in the third. No, he was hurting, and he even said after Dimitrov that, which is unusual for him, closing out a straight set match, that he wasn't sure until the last point that he was going to win it. I mean, that's unlike him. He was clearly suffering. Now, was it enough to it was not on the level that he was going to have to withdraw, but he had to take very special care with that hamstring. And obviously, he described it later, going on these machines on the days off, taking taking them whatever medications he needed, the anti-inflammatories, all of
mhm,
that stuff, and not practicing.
yeah,
And again, that reminds me a bit of what Pete Sampras went through in the 2000 Wimbledon when he won his record-breaking 13th major and beat Patrick Rafter in the final. And he'd been very gimpy the whole tournament. He'd had a bad leg. He couldn't play on his days off. It's not fun for these top players to have to deal with something like that. But this was real. That's my point. This injury was valid. It was authentic, and there was no gamesmanship involved. You heard him say, Bonch, after he beat De Minaur in the fourth round, that's the first time you really believed that he could actually win the tournament. Until then, it was all about survival. Then it became much more about, I'm ready to win this thing now. My leg is improving. I can move better. And he hit top form against De Minaur. And that was the turning point in my mind, that fourth round match where he took him apart in straight sets.
yeah, for sure. And you look at his run overall. I think he only lost a serve total of six times, which for
That's
him, I
right.
mean, this is one of the
That's right.
most
If
dominant
you look
runs in his career.
exactly, and not only the six times, but not broken in the first or second rounds. Dimitrov managed to get him three times. He didn't get broken by De Minaur. He didn't get broken by Rublev. Then it happened a couple of times, surprisingly, against Tommy Paul in the semis when he was
Yeah.
up 5-1, 40-30, and he lost his serve twice from there. And then once in the final. That's pretty remarkable. It's just more evidence of what's gone on in the last few years, the influence of Ivan Isevich and his own emphasis. He was always a very good spot server, but he's put more emphasis now on the combination of pace and precision. And it's some of the best serving of his career, not to mention that the forehand was so devastating. The pace and the accuracy and the consistency of the forehand, where he was dictating matches with it, and those two things combined, we've always known he had one of the great backhands of all time. You put the serve and the forehand into play like that, and they're that effective. It was a three-way deadly blend from Djokovic that buried everybody else.
Yep. And then you add in the fact that he was playing on Rod Laver Arena, where he's never lost a semifinal, never lost a final. He's now 10-0
Right.
in both rounds, and he's getting to play. He played all 7 matches at night, which was, a really massive. It massively even adds more to his aura, I think, because he just loves those conditions, and they're just.
He does. He does. You're right. And, I heard I had a friend, an email or two from friends saying, is that fair that he plays it? Well, listen,
he's won it 9 times, so.
I think you kind of earn that right after a certain point in your career. This is the kind of thing that would have been done for Roger or for Rafa or any great player. And it's also nice for the spectators that, the evening crowd to have him out there for all those matches. And obviously, you're pretty much automatically going to get it from the quarters on. And he got a break in the early rounds, but I think it was well deserved.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously his the absolute demolitions that he put on against de Minaur and Rublev, I mean, just simply took apart Rublev like to pieces. There was just, in some ways, I think Rublev kind of walked on that court somewhat mentally defeated as well.
Yeah, well, he had said, it's interesting because he'd said prior to the match, after beating Holger Rune, which was a big win for him, he said nobody wants to play Novak. So you knew, and he'd taken a real sound beating from him 4-1, I guess it was, in the year-end championships in Italy. So that was pretty fresh in his mind as well. And I think he knows he has to be playing incredibly well. The win that he had over Novak in Serbia on the clay last year was, I hate to say it, but it was kind of meaningless.
Yeah.
If you consider where Novak was at that point and struggling that entire week, and he just hadn't found himself yet after all that was sort of the aftermath of everything that happened in Australia and starting his year late. And it wasn't until it was really when he got to Rome and won Rome, that's when things started to turn around. But I think it's a good matchup for Novak. I have to say, not that he needed any help, because in the form that he was in, I honestly don't think I don't care who he played in this tournament. I don't care if he'd had to play Holger Rune. I don't care if he'd had to play Felix, any number of guys that were there that he didn't have to meet. I think in this form, he beats anybody. Having said that, I think it was also helpful that the draw was pretty kind throughout and enabled him to feel relaxed. He would have been a bit more uptight about playing Holger Rune. I'm convinced he would have beaten him, but I think psychologically coming off the loss in indoors in Paris last year and Rune being such a fearless sort of, he's not irreverent. He has great respect for Novak, but he has a great sort of cocky layer to him. He really believes in himself, and he's pretty exuberant out there, and he has high aspirations. So that could have been somewhat tense for a set or two if they had met. That was something of a break. And then maybe Tommy Paul in the semis had a great tournament, but that's not who Novak's expecting to play when the tournament starts. You don't think that's going to be the semifinal. So certain things broke for him, but he was relentless, and he lost one set in the tournament, as you know, in a tiebreaker in the second round. That was it. It was a very impressive fortnight for Djokovic, who never let his guard down the entire time. And once he started feeling good physically, like he did in the fourth round on, then his game was at another level. And even the lapse against Tommy Paul didn't really end up costing him, because he had 5-1, 40-30, missed a forehand down the line. And the next thing you know, he's broken, and he's broken again the next time, serving a double in the next game, and it gets to 5-all. But at 5-all, he buckles down, has an easy hold, and then breaks in the next game. And he ends up winning 14 of the last 17 games there, too. So it was pretty much as convincing as the previous two matches that he'd had against de Minaur and Rublev.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, then it all gets to the crescendo, which is the final between him and Stefanos. And coming in, he had already beaten Stefanos 9 times. Obviously, we have the French Open final where he came back from 2 sets to love down, and then was pretty much the decisive player for the last 3 sets. But in this match, obviously Stefanos was playing extremely well. He's got a lot of Greek support, but not only that, his run to the final I thought was also very encouraging. Beating Sinner along the way in 5 sets. He had a slight dip maybe in the 3rd and 4th against Sinner, but then he navigated his way nicely in the semifinal against Khachanov. And you thought, I was coming in fully expecting Djokovic to win in three tight sets. Maybe I predicted four going into the final. I thought Stefanos might be able to win that set, and lo and behold, he had that one set point in the second set. But I thought it was a first-rate performance from Djokovic, and I think Stefanos can leave with his head held pretty high because I think it was a decently competitive affair for his second major final.
Stefanos was not disappointed in himself, nor should he have been, because really, yes, he was a little tight in the first set, but Djokovic was almost letter perfect. Then he won 20 of 25 points on his serve in that set. He was not near getting broken. And he got the early break for 3-1. He'd had 15-40 in the second game and didn't break him. But then he did the next time. And through that phase, Stefanos had not really found the range, nor was he serving his best. And he was feeling the occasion, I think, the weight of the occasion. But then afterward, it got tougher, obviously, those last two sets. And all credit to Tsitsipas for that. That 10th game of the second set was crucial, Vanch, as you know, because I still think Djokovic would have been the winner in four sets had he gotten broken at 4 or 5 in the second. I strongly suspect he would have regained the ascendancy, but he didn't want to have to explore that scenario. Let's put it that way. And in typical fashion, he buckled down, and on that set point, it was a good rally, and some people felt that Tsitsipas should have been more aggressive. I know John McEnroe felt that way. But I looked at that rally. I watched that point 3 or 4 times. Yeah. Tsitsipas was keeping his shots deep in that rally. He was just waiting for some type of an opening, which he never got. And then Novak's picked just the right ball, a cross-court backhand from Tsitsipas. It was fairly deep, but not hit terribly hard. And Novak just stepped around and hit his forehand inside in. But nowhere near the sideline. It was just struck perfectly and just caught him off guard. And Tsitsipas is stranded on the other backhand side of the court, so it's a clean winner. And then he holds on for 5-all. And then that was an interesting tiebreak, Vanch, because I thought Novak was typically in that lockdown mode up to 4-1, and then he did get tight. And Tsitsipas got it back to 4-all because Novak lost 2 points in a row on his serve, which was really surprising from 4-1. You thought he'd be at the very least get to 5-2. Didn't. But then just in another typically Djokovic fashion, he just got right back at it at 4-all. You kind of sensed at 4-all that he'd had enough, and he decided, I'm not missing another ball. And, he out-hit him from the baseline 2 straight points, and then a service winner wide to the forehand. And just like that, 3 points in a row, and it's 2 sets to love. And obviously, Tsitsipas's forehand faltered in that tiebreak, and he got tight, and he never really played that well in that tiebreak. But again, Djokovic did not let it get out of hand. That, I think, was really, really important for him to have the cushion of the 2-set lead and know that, with his experience, he was going to find a way to get across that finish line as soon as possible. But the start of the third was kind of intriguing because I didn't expect Djokovic after the bathroom break to come back and play a sloppy game the way he did. It was one of his it was his only bad service game. And he started with a double fault and ended up getting broken. But then he gets it right back. Tsitsipas had 30-love in the second game, and Novak came back and broke him. And that was also very important because Stefanos was not able to establish any momentum at all. If he could have had a little quick 2-love lead in the third, maybe starts to believe that he can get that set. But he was put right back in his place so swiftly by Djokovic getting that break in the second game. And then I thought from there, Djokovic, every service game was, he had a hold at 30 and then 4 love holds in a row after that to get to the tiebreak. And Tsitsipas, to his credit, he was unyielding too, and he refused to be broken again. And fittingly, we settled it in another tiebreak. And I thought that tiebreak could well have ended up much more decisive in Djokovic's fashion because he won the first 5 points. But then, having done that, in the middle of the next point, and the rally was pretty neutral at that stage, and Djokovic was hitting the ball well. They both were, but nobody really had the edge. And then suddenly a fan screamed out, clearly distracted Djokovic. And that at that point ended up being somewhat significant because Tsitsipas worked his way back to 5-3, and then Novak went to 6-3 before Tsitsipas saved 2 match points. And then we had another example of Djokovic sort of measuring his shots perfectly. And at 6-5 on serve there, he had a very good forehand inside in pretty low and not too deep deliberately and close to the sideline. And that meant that Tsitsipas had to cover a lot of court and was stretched out on his forehand, and he drove it long. So it was a really first-rate performance. And I thought Djokovic handled the Tsitsipas comebacks in both tiebreaks exceedingly well. And he deserved to win it in straight. It's quite a remarkable feat. 10 wins in a row over somebody that capable, a player, who's played such high level tennis, and a player who at one time had a 2-1 record against Novak in 18 and 19. He has won 2 of the first 3 matches, both on hard courts, both in 3 sets too. So, but since then, Novak has dominated the rivalry despite many hard fought close contests. Where I'm encouraged for Tsitsipas, Vanch, is that he was so reverential toward Djokovic afterwards, but not in a way that wasn't healthy. In other words, he felt like he'd given it his all. He'd come in fully believing. He'd even dreamed about winning it the night before. He literally had a dream about that. And he just lauded Djokovic as being the best player ever in his mind. But more than that, he just knew. I like hearing him say, I just lost to a better player, because there's no reason for him to be disconsolate about losing that match in straight. Certainly gave Novak his toughest match of the tournament. And yes, it was still straight, but 2 of the 3 sets are breakers. Tsitsipas lost his serve once in the first set early and once in the third set early when Djokovic got even. So that's not so terrible. And I think the Djokovic serving numbers, I wouldn't be too critical of Tsitsipas for that, because as you just alluded to earlier, when 6 breaks in 7 matches, nobody was able to really get into Djokovic's service games very effectively. He was disciplined throughout, all across those 7 matches that he played. So I think it was one of his more impressive majors. It's not the toughest draw he's had, but the sustained good form, and particularly the form that he maintained from de Minaur straight through Rublev and Tommy Paul and Tsitsipas. And he had to. In Tsitsipas, he was facing his most formidable rival by far in the tournament, but there was a clear disparity between the two.
Yeah, he really managed to separate himself in several categories, even though the scoreline was so close, because I mean, particularly Tsitsipas has one of the biggest forehands in the game. We know how much damage it can do after his first shot, but also on the defense. And I think what Djokovic is able to do so well, he's able to challenge Tsitsipas's forehand. And he does this with all the best forehands. I've seen him do this to Del Potro, to Federer, to Casper Ruud, to players.
Yeah, he does it to all of them.
Forehand is really imposing.
His attitude is you prove to me that your forehand is so good because I think mine is better. I think he really does. And I think, frankly, it is. It is. I was surprised a little bit that John McEnroe said before the match that he thought the one edge that Tsitsipas had over Novak was the forehand. I never really believed that, because when he's given the time that he had against Khachanov or any of the others, he can do devastating things off that wing. But Djokovic comes at him with all of that firepower and consistency. And, he now averages over 80 miles an hour on every forehand, and used to be in the mid-70s. So he's got the pace, the depth, the control, and he doesn't seem to miss. He still misses so few, even hitting it harder.
Yep.
And that, I think, had to be really disconcerting for Stefanos, because forehand to forehand, he was not, as has been the case in most of the recent matches. As you know, they met 4 times last year. And it's been the case almost every time they play. And then we always knew that the back-end cross-court exchanges favored Djokovic, to be sure. Nothing close there. And then, even though Stefanos serves bigger than Novak, he didn't serve better.
Yeah,
Djokovic outserved him as well. So it was really a very clinical performance from Djokovic. And now he's raised his record, Vanch, as you know, in the major finals to 22-11, which is very impressive, because at one time he was 6-7. He's won 16 of his last 20 major finals. So he's become really an increasingly excellent big match player, and he's determined to exploit every opportunity he can get to win these major finals. Looking back on that streak of 16 out of 20, or that run, interestingly, there's just a few U.S. Open finals that are surprising, really, when you look back, especially and looking back on the Medvedev match. I guess the strain was too much going for the Grand Slam. There's a few isolated days like that, but boy, there have not been many because he seems to be primed for every single major final that he plays.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I was thinking about that 16-4 yesterday because I remember there was that break point in the fifth set against Federer in the 2014 Wimbledon final, and once he saved that, whew, I mean, because he was on a losing streak in major finals up until that point.
Yeah, that was a big one.
And as you know, he was 5-2 up in the fourth, and he had match point.
Well, that was the thing. That's what made that match so strange. Yeah, he should have closed it in 4, and then he could have lost in 5, but he came through in the clutch and pulled it out.
Yeah.
But he's had phases. He had a good phase early in his career, won 5 of his first 7. After that great 2011 season, he had a good record in the major finals. But then it slipped, and what he's been able to do really from 15 on is pretty phenomenal. And that's why he's now tied with Rafa in the majors. And you think the other thing, of course, is that has to be gratifying is that he went through such an ordeal last year, obviously not being able to play in Australia and being deported. And the whole thing was humiliating and in many ways unfair because he should probably have been told by Tennis Australia not to come over in the first place, in the sense that they should have conferred with the federal government and everybody should have been on the same page, and they weren't. So be that as it may, that was a really difficult experience, as was missing the US Open. So last year he played 2 majors. He wins Wimbledon and he loses to Nadal and Roland Garros. And so that's pretty tough to miss 2 majors in 1 year in your prime, and then to come back and win this title now and catch Nadal again, because it was also not easy to come from 2 majors behind Rafa to make it even again. Not easy at all, but he's done it by winning Wimbledon last year. Well, for him, it's his last 2 majors because he didn't play at the Open. So he's personally won 2 majors in a row, and that took some doing, and it'll be fascinating to see now where we're headed and whether Rafa can get healthy again. What is your take on that, Vanch? Most people I speak to are kind of pessimistic about Rafa regaining his physical health to the point where he can play on his terms again. I'm not quite as quick to pronounce that because of what I saw last year. I never would have believed that he could come back from what he endured in 21 with the foot and missing the second half of the year like that, win Australia improbably from 2 sets down and nearly a breakdown against Medvedev, 2-3 left 40 in the third. And then to win the French when he's getting injections every day. And he said he's got no feeling in his foot. And that was after a really disrupted clay court campaign. So he's still, it's such an extraordinary figure. I'm not quite ready to say we've seen the last of Rafa yet. But what would be nice is a healthy Rafa comes back, plays well on the clay. Novak maintains this high level stuff. And if they could, I would hope that maybe this year we could get them on the opposite half of the draw again in Paris. They played in that 2020 final, yes, but then it was the 2021 semis where Novak beat Rafa, and then we were back to the quarters last year. I don't want to see that happen. I hope that they can meet potentially in the final if Rafa's healthy and if Novak has a good run, which he usually does at Roland Garros. And that would be really a great spectacle and great fun to see them meet on that stage with a 23rd major on the line and one of them taking the lead again. Well, for Novak, it would be the first time he took the lead.
Yeah, I share your opinion about several pundits and several commentators were so quick after he lost to Jack Draper to just, almost like writing his obituary or almost hinting at it like, oh, the end is near. And we've seen this so many times with Rafa.
We have.
And to add some merit to their point, I was a little surprised that he played at the end of last year, given that he just had a baby. And, you would have thought, okay, maybe Paris, London, he could have skipped one, if not both. But that being said, I mean, he's going to have now 5 or 6, 7 weeks. I don't think he'll play Indian Wells. I don't think he'll play Miami. He'll go through his entire play stretch.
I was thinking about that earlier. I hope he doesn't.
I hope if I'm him, I'm skipping those 2 tournaments.
Yeah, because the priority has got to be to get out on the clay and play as many clay court tournaments as his body can take, and get back into a winning flow again, which he hasn't felt really since for a long time. I mean, the very beginning of last year was spectacular because he won the 250 event in Melbourne, then the Australian Open, then he went over and won Acapulco.
Yeah.
And beat Medvedev again there too. And then was in the finals of Indian Wells. So he started the year off as well as he could possibly have imagined. And then, but we haven't seen a role like that. It's harder and harder for him to do that kind of thing. And then, of course, since Wimbledon, when he got to the semi and had a default to Kyrgios, it's been a terrible run for him since then, where he just has not been able to win many matches at all. The best showing he had was fourth round at the U.S. Open. And it was sad to see him sort of so hindered in his second round loss to McDonald in Australia. And it was gallant, I thought, of him to stay out on the court. He could easily have quit. So I admired him for finishing the match. But you seem to share my view. I'm still not ready to say it's over. I want to see what happens on the clay. And usually on the clay, he did have some problems last year, but most seasons on the clay is when he tends to be at his healthiest. His body doesn't break down as much, and the softer courts it's his best surface, and it's hot out most of the time, and all of these factors seem to help him to play his best. And then he just absolutely loves the clay, and his game is just tailor-made for it. So I want to see that. I want to see how he looks over the course of the clay season, and before we make any kind of judgment.
Yeah, I mean, he has lost 7 of his last 9 matches since, I think, beating Gasquet at the third round of the U.S. Open.
Yeah,
but,
right.
And some of those losses were, players weren't having to redline their games to beat him. So that's, maybe one area where you could say, okay, yeah, maybe, the rest of the tour is catching up. The serve, he seems to be kind of wearing off a little bit in these matches. What I mean is he'll win the first set, he's such a good front runner normally, but in these situations he's been kind of doubting himself a little bit more, getting that momentum, those match wins, and you kind of have to win matches to get that momentum. And I think he should just not play anything until Monte Carlo, Barcelona, and maybe even pace himself there. And maybe hopefully by Madrid and Rome, his form is looking a lot better. And I hope he's not like number 10 or 12, and then we have Djokovic and Nadal in the fourth round. I really hope that's not the case. He's been a top 10 player since April of 2005, and that streak itself is so remarkable, as you know. So
it is. But you know what? He's more susceptible to the injuries on the hard, obviously. For the most part, and he'd be coming in cold, coming in after all these losses. What would he have to go on? So the danger is, if he started with Indian Wells, he could lose early there, then go to Miami. Still, it doesn't make any sense. While if he goes on the clay, even the longer break, that's his turf, that's his setting. There's a good chance he plays his way into form very quickly and does nicely in Monte Carlo. So I just feel like it's kind of a no-brainer decision, but we'll see what he decides to do. And it's going to be all I would say is, even if he kind of regains some of that health and some of his form, and we see something closer to the best Nadal, unless there's a dramatic turnaround, in terms of, say, winning Roland, good enough that he can win a 15th Roland Garros and good enough to contend at Wimbledon. If the results remain mediocre, then I could definitely see this being his last year. But I think he's going to play it out and keep giving himself every chance he has to find some renewed vigor and confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there were some names that definitely were missing in this tournament that I think could have added to the excitement. I mean, not that we didn't have a good tournament as it already was, and you had some exciting names with, especially the Americans doing well. You have so many Americans now in the top 50 and 60 in the world, and you have the likes of Shelton and Paul, and it was a shame that Fritz went out early, but obviously American men's tennis is looking good. But you just hope that Alcaraz gets healthy and we see a good season from him. On the clay coming up, and then Indian Wells and Miami, and he's able to build that momentum because he's such an exciting player. And I was a little bit, bummed, I think, for the sake of the whole tournament, that maybe Rune didn't get to play Djokovic. I mean, in the end, it was a great effort by Rublev to get through, but those are kind of the names you circle with Alcaraz.
Well, you're right. That was a bizarre match
Yeah,
because,
let's talk about that a little bit actually, because
well, yeah, I mean, think about it. Rune comes from 2 sets to 1 down. He goes up 5-2 in the fifth. And okay, so he didn't serve it out and it goes to 5-all. That can happen. But then he has 2 match points with Rublev serving at 5-6. He can't convert those. Then he has a third chance by winning the first 5 points, 5-0, 5-love in the tiebreak. And he couldn't do anything with that lead. That was surprising me, that many opportunities. And you just wonder, was he just overly excited about getting to the quarters, getting an opportunity to play Djokovic? You don't know. It's hard to know all the reasons why those leads eluded him and why he couldn't convert on them. But that I don't think it'll set him back long, Vanch. It's just, I thought, given those circumstances, he would have been good enough to do it. Rublev stayed calm. Rublev was solid when he had to be. When he was behind, he didn't show that usual anger and despair that we've seen from him so many times. So part of it, I tip my hat to him, but it was a disappointing loss for Rune and deprived him of the chance to play Djokovic for the first time since that dramatic win he had over him indoors in Paris last November. So it would have been fun to see that meeting, to see how Novak responded. I think Novak would have been all business and ready for it, but it would have been exciting. Nonetheless, I still expect some spectacular things from Rune over the course of this season. Ups and downs, it'll be pendulum swinging. It won't all be clear sailing, but he's going to have some shining moments this year. And then I think we'll see where he goes from there. I still think that he has that champion's mentality, and it's a matter of growing up and growing into it, because the game, I think, is there. I think it's about his temperament. I think it's about his outlook and not getting overly excited. And Patrick can help him with that, when you have a coach that experienced. I think he can help him deal with these circumstances and try to calm him down and get him sort of zeroed in on his targets and not looking too far ahead and taking it one at a time. So I'm still very optimistic about him. Aren't you?
I am, and actually, to be honest, it reminded me a lot of Alcaraz's loss last year to Berrettini in the third round of the Australian Open. In the sense that more complete player, sort of loses to someone more established in the top 10, and it's an experience, lack of maturity, maybe on some of the big points, some decision making in those crucial junctures, but overall, kind of growing pains, and you have to take those losses sometimes in majors for the long term, and that's kind of how I looked at it.
Yeah, it could be. I see the analogy. I think that I don't think that Carlos squandered. He didn't have as many opportunities, but you're right. It went right down to the wire, and that's this set, fifth set tiebreak. So that there's the similarity.
And then I think Carlos, if he had gotten through that, he would have had a good chance to play Rafa in the semis, and then we could have had an excellent match there. And I think it would have been the same with Rune for Novak. That's where I see.
I think Novak would have been kind of grim faced and ready, and he would have started off very strong against Rune, but it's too, we didn't get to see it, so be it. It's not the kind of thing that I think is going to set Rune back for long. That's my point.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, some of the other losses that kind of happened early on. I mean, you look at Felix. I never thought really got going in this tournament. I mean, he had to come back from 2-0 down to beat Molchan. I think it was in the second round, and then he didn't look very convincing in his first round or third round either, and his level just wasn't very high enough. And credit to Lehechka, who's had an amazing tournament, and he beat the likes of Nori and Chorich in the first round, and it was a good win against Felix as well. But every time they just went into extended rallies, him and Lehechka, I just felt like Lehechka had a massive edge every time it went over 4 or 5 shots, and Felix's serve was pretty much keeping him in the match. But we saw some of those same things that we've seen sometimes when he's not at his very best, and you hope he has better showings in the next 3 majors.
Yeah, I mean, listen, considering how the strong ending to last year and the 3 titles and the just a really impressive conclusion to 2022, you hoped for more from him. And it is, to me, kind of an inexplicable defeat. And he lost the last 2 sets in tie breaks, which makes it even more disappointing, because that's where you're supposed to separate the men from the boys. Yeah. And he didn't show us that. And again, I think he's a pretty even-tempered guy. I think he's clear-minded. I think he keeps things in perspective. So I don't think he'll let it hinder him for long, but you also have to be tough on yourself about it and try to prevent it from ever happening again, because he had set the stage to be a real threat here. And look, he's very good on clay. He took Rafa to 5 at the French last year. He can do very well again at the French, and certainly at Wimbledon and the Open, he's very dangerous. So I hope we see the best of Felix at those events, because he's such an exemplary representative for the game in every respect. The completeness of his game, his character, his demeanor, it's all there. The fans can't help but love him, and I think he'll turn it around. I hope he can get on something of a roll between now and the French to kind of restore that confidence.
Yeah, definitely. And another guy I'm interested to get your take on is Casper Ruud, because obviously, we were talking about him when he made the finals of Turin, and then he went on an exhibition tour with Rafa, and I can't really criticize him much for that, because it's kind of a once in a lifetime sort of opportunity to go and travel the South America tour and play those matches. But then after that, I really don't think he gave himself a proper off season, and you can see the way he kind of tailed off a little bit in that fourth set, and he didn't look physically at his most fresh. And he was, when he was asked questions about it in his press conference, he kind of gave a very diplomatic answer. And I think he'll look at it again for future years to see if he can, schedule himself better so he can be in prime physical and mental condition, at his very optimal peak. It has to be said that Brooksby played an awesome match, and his match acumen can be confounding for these top players.
Yeah, I hear you on all those points, Vanch. My concern for him is that he set pretty high standards last year. This is a guy that's in the finals of the French, which was a big, big deal. A little shocking, but very impressive, his best surface. Then very unexpectedly reaching the finals of the U.S. Open and making it very competitive against Carlos in the final. Hard-fought 4-set final. And then he goes to Turin. He's in the finals of the year-end championships. Nobody expected that either indoors. So for him to do that indoor hard at the year-end, hard courts at the U.S. Open, and even the French final, to live up to those laurels this year is going to be very difficult. So part of his issue, I think, is psychological. Yeah. Can he maintain standards that high this year? And can he replicate what he did last year? He's got to try to get that out of his mind and just take each opportunity for what it's worth, and just look at this year in an isolated way. I hope he does that. But then we're also going to find out if he's really the kind of player that can post results like that year after year, or whether that was a banner year and he slips back a notch this year and maybe we see him drop to between 10 and 15 in the world. I wouldn't be shocked if that happened either.
Yeah, definitely a wait and see situation there. But obviously, someone else who we have to talk about is Medvedev, because now he's outside the top 10 and just hasn't been the same player at all. You can trace it all the way back to last year, the Australian Open final. And since then, you've watched the match against Korda, and, you can say, okay, maybe there was a tight first set, and Sevi got a little bit tight up 2 breaks in the first set, and Medvedev kind of really, and that's those situations he would more often than not come through in a tiebreak like that, and maybe you wouldn't expect a scoreline like that even as well as Sevi played. So you have to ask yourself the question, where are we at with Medvedev? And I honestly don't know, but I'm a little bit concerned for him, actually pretty concerned.
Yeah, listen, he's taken a big hit in the rankings. I still trace much of this back to the Rafa final of a year ago. And that's a devastating psychological blow. That's the kind of match that can haunt you for a long, long time. And I think it's happened to him because he was on the verge of a second straight major title, having won the Open over Novak. So he was in a position to beat Novak Djokovic in the finals of the U.S. Open, followed by beating Rafa Nadal in the finals of the Australian Open. He was on the verge of doing that. And then that match getting away the way it did. And even the end of the match, after he of course had 2 sets to love, 3-2, love 40. Okay, Rafa holds on and wins that set, wins the 4th, and then Rafa serves to the match in the 5th, and Medvedev breaks back. And even then, he had a second chance, but immediately lost his serve at 5-all in the 5th, and it was soon over. So, yes, just to get back to the present, I just trace it back to that because I think that set him on the wrong path last year. Then, as you know, he had the hernia problem in the spring. He couldn't play Wimbledon. There were some things that were not his fault. But then when he had an opportunity to sort of get it going again, over the summer, I mean, a couple of losses in the Kyrgios, including the U.S. Open, and he didn't finish the year that great. And then he lost all those heartbreakers in the year-end championships, all those third set tie breaks. I mean, every match was a heartbreaking loss to Rublev, to Novak, and Tsitsipas, all three. Rublev, Tsitsipas, Novak. So some of these losses he's played pretty well in defeat. Others he hasn't, but he's definitely taken a hit in terms of his psyche. And then the question becomes: have guys figured him out? We know what a wall he can be when he's at his best and getting every ball back, but it doesn't really punish the forehand that much. His backhand, he hits through with a I think a bit more penetrating. His serve can be great, but maybe it's become a little predictable. And then he seems to get niggling injuries. But there was a little problem with his arm there. He gave a great press conference, one of the best I've seen him ever do in defeat. I watched it on YouTube, and he was so laudatory toward Korda. He said some really nice things about him, and he didn't talk about this little arm injury he had until the end, only because he was asked. I don't think he would have ever brought it up, and he said it in the context of we all have little injuries. It happens to everybody, and he didn't in any way try to blame it for the defeat. But he's going to have a tough path ahead to work his way back up. Guys are not afraid of him now. They know he's still a tough guy to beat, but that maybe they're not as afraid of him. And you just wonder what's going to happen with him. What happens the next time he plays Korda? What happens, does an informed Felix start beating him? Tsitsipas had started to turn the rivalry around. He's doing well against him. How will he fare against Alcaraz? Novak, who had been having some problems, some back and forth problems with him, including that U.S. Open loss, has really recently gotten his measure and beat him a couple of times last year at the end of the year, and then again at the start of this year in Adelaide. So he's got so many guys now that seem to be on top of him. He's going to be one to watch this year because you hope it doesn't spiral on him. And it's not like I think he's going to stop winning matches or stop getting to the latter stages of tournaments. But boy, winning the tournaments and putting himself in a position to win majors. And then, of course, the next one, Vanch, is the Roland Garros. I mean, he's improved on clay, but it's still definitely his worst surface. So then the question becomes, can he do something big that could help him later in the year by making a real sparkling showing at an Indian Wells or Miami? At this point, I'm not confident that he will.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And, maybe you're looking at him second half of the year, and maybe just kind of has to get one really big win going. But it's tough because, like I said, so many guys know how to play him now, and they kind of understand the rule book and what they have to do tactically, I think, with the variety, drawing him forward, the deep return position that he has, and some of those adjustments. And also, I don't think his serve is anywhere near as good as it used to be. The second serve used to be more under control than it is now, and it's
double faults more.
A lot of double faults, yeah.
A lot of double faults, and the second serve is not as reliable. First serve maybe not quite as piercingly accurate as it once was. He could probably rediscover his form on the. I could see him start serving better, and just playing better overall. But it's going to be very difficult for him, with that many guys able to compete with him and able to beat him. And the other question with him, Vanch, is just that temperament. Is that he, there are times when he gets very frazzled out there. There are times when you feel like nothing can disturb him at all. But he's erratic that way. Then he's badgering, making these comments to his corner. Now, obviously, we saw Djokovic in this tournament. There are times that he even kind of apologized to his team after the final because he knows he gives them a really hard time. There are times he vents with them. But the difference is he just wants to vent, and then he can get on with it. I feel like with Medvedev, when he starts moaning to his corner and complaining and acting, he acts like he's some kind of victim. Novak acts like he's angry and wants to do something about it. Daniel is more, how can this be happening to me? And then he can really go downhill mentally. So I worry about that part too, in addition to his game.
Yeah, he can really let it linger for quite a long time. But I think someone else we should give a shout out to in the first week was Andy Murray, because I mean the kind of resilience and perseverance that he showed to come through those first two matches. I know it's one of those where we've seen it before, and he doesn't have much energy left, and it's not really, at this point you're not looking at him as a contender to win these Grand Slam tournaments, but more just, add to his career legacy and win these big matches. I mean, coming back from two sets to love down, that Kokkinakis match was unreal, and then you have the Berrettini match, which he even could have conceivably finished, quicker in the third or fourth set, but and then eventually ended up
Yes, good
against
point.
Bautista.
Good point.
But
Good point, because that's a good example. Suppose he beats Berrettini in straight, that he managed to sort of win a tiebreaker in the third and get off the court instead of having to go to the fifth set tiebreak. And obviously, he could have also just lost the match because Berrettini had the opening for the match point backhand passing shot that he missed.
yeah,
But still, no, I mean, I'm not terribly encouraged. I think it's a step forward, and I think it's commendable that he could win that and then come back and beat Kokkinakis. And finally, he had very little left for RBA. But I don't know. I just feel like he talks about getting his ranking up, Vanch. He's mentioned that. You've heard him talk about it. If he can get a better ranking, better get himself seated, put himself in, okay. But I don't see how just getting seated is going to stop him from getting in long matches from guys who don't happen to be seated. There are too many guys in the top 50 or 100 that can at least test him and keep him out there and make him work hard through 4 or 5 sets. And then in the Masters 1000s, when you're playing day after day, what happens? You get in a couple of tough 3-setters in a row to get to the quarters. Does he have anything left for that quarter on Friday evening? So it's going to be interesting. You have to admire him for trying.
yeah,
The fact that he's willing to still be out there now. Obviously, he and Novak were born a week apart back in '87. So we're talking about coming up on 36 now in a few months. And he's a much older 36, given what he's been through with his hip, than Novak is. So it's worrisome, but he'll figure it out. And at least he's had some encouraging results. And the Berrettini win was one of the most exhilarating things that's happened to Andy in a long, long time.
yeah, absolutely. And also, I thought last year he was starting to play a lot better in the grass season. He made that final in Stuttgart. He had some good wins over Tsitsipas and Kyrgios along the way. And then he hurt his abdominal, I think, after he won the second set. And I thought, oh no, there goes Wimbledon. But, he did recover well enough, and he got to the second round. And I'm thinking, if he can schedule himself right, I'm interested to see how he schedules himself. Does he play any of the clay tournaments? Does he because I think if you're looking at one big area where I think Andy can actually make a deep run, maybe the fourth round or something, that would be Wimbledon, where he could.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I could even see maybe
chance.
I could see even in the best case scenario, quarter and maybe even sneak into a semi, but everything has to fall into place. And you're right. Good point about the grass, because this is in a Wimbledon that's his place. It's 2 majors there. He got it in, he looks back to 13. He looks back to 16. He's got great memories of that place, and he's got the Olympic memory, and he's got the crowds cheering him on. That's worth something. But I hope between now and then we see some good signs also. I mean, a lot of it will have to do with the standards he sets between now and June.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, someone else who's had a really good start to the year is Sebastian Korda. He's now in the top 25, and he's got, this Adelaide, he had the match point against Djokovic, and I don't think he'll have many regrets about that, because Djokovic hit an incredibly difficult overhead actually to save that.
Did he ever? Yeah. Sebastian lobbed over his backhand side, and Novak got back really nicely for it and hit it inside out for the winner. No, he couldn't. That was the right shot to play. You want to make him hit an overhead in a situation like that. He did, and it was pretty decent lob. And listen, he couldn't have many quibbles about that. It was a great performance. It was not a top of the line Djokovic. Yeah. But it still doesn't matter, because Djokovic on those days, on those slightly off days, is still going to beat most people comfortably enough. And then to follow it up by beating not only Medvedev but Hurkacz in that another pendulum swing weird 5th set tiebreak, because he's 3-1 up, and then he's 3-1 down, he's 7-3 up. Hurkacz is back to 7-all, but again, he had the composure to get through that. And I actually thought going in, Vanch, that he would beat Khachanov and make the semi, and that would have been interesting had he done it. had he not hurt his wrist and had he beaten Hachinov and he got a crack at Tsitsipas in the semis, that could have been quite an interesting match.
Yeah.
But we didn't get to see it. But I do think even with the disappointment of hurting his wrist and having to retire against Hachinov, it was still a good showing, quarterfinals on the heels of finals of Adelaide. So I think we might see him now. I get a feeling, he's going to make a bid for the top 10 this year, the bottom of the top 10, because I think he's that good. But he can't afford to keep these injuries happen a little too frequently. I hope that stops this year. In the last couple of years, there were little things happening on too large a basis, too frequently. And I hope that stops this year and he can get on a run of good physical health, because when he is healthy, he's capable of beating a lot of players. And I think his confidence is building, and you can sense he's getting a little bit quietly cocky. I mean that as a compliment. But he now doesn't live in awe of any of his adversaries. He believes in himself, and I'm excited about him. I have been for a couple of years, but this was the best development for him and best stretch for him in a long, long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think his serve looks bigger than it did in points last year, and he looks like he's put on a little bit of muscle in the offseason, which I think for him is key, because he definitely had to bulk up a little bit, and he's done that.
Yeah,
so I think,
he does. And you feel like it's kind of effortless with him. I don't feel, he's got all that pace off the ground. He just swings freely. The serve, you don't feel like he's muscling it or arming it. It's just a good motion, and timing is excellent, and he's a good match player. And there's, and look, you talk about the other Americans. Fritz, I think, is going to have a great year. I think Tiafoe is going to keep working hard and have a more consistent year than he did. Tommy Paul can build on the semifinals showing that he had here. So, and we'll see about Brooksby. But there was one nice win. We'll see if he can get to the next level. But the American contingent it's the best we've had in ages. I mean, I think if you look at it from top to bottom, these guys in the top 50 and the top 100, it's the best lineup we've had since the greatest American generation of Sampras, Agassi, Chang, Courier back in the 90s.
Yeah, for sure. And then
I think it's even better than the Roddick, Blake, Fish era, which was very good. Yeah. But we've got more guys now in the forefront, and I think they're going to be heading toward the top 10. Taylor's going to have his crack and at sort of establishing himself as a consistent top 10 player. Francis is trying to make a move toward that territory. Korda is fully capable of being in that territory. And we'll see if Tommy Paul can make the jump now from getting into the top 20 and he pushes toward the top 10. I think they're all going to improve.
Yeah.
So
it's scary to think how much Ben Shelton can improve as well. Even though he's made a major quarterfinal, you felt like, watching that match against Tommy Paul, I felt like his backhand can get better. I think his match playing skills can definitely get better.
Yeah, I think his ground game overall stands room for a great improvement, and it will happen. And of course, you're left-handed like he is, and you're that kind of an athlete, and you can serve that well. He was scaring the daylights out of a lot of guys with the way he was serving over there, and it took somewhat of Tommy Paul's, polish and match playing acumen and good solid returning skills to finally get to him. But that was a great tournament. Now he's done himself such a favor by doing that in terms of the rankings, so he's going to be able to get in anywhere he wants and play the 1000s, and he's got. I expect him to sort of. I would think end of this year we might be looking at Shelton somewhere around 25 in the world.
Yeah, that seems very much doable, I think. Now,
so Vanch, what do you think now? Let's just talk at the end here a little bit before we get to the women's final. What are your thoughts on this rest of this year for Djokovic? Here's my thought, and then you tell me what yours. But I feel like if he is not able to play Indian Wells and Miami because they still the vaccine rule stays in place, I think he'll be by the U.S. Open. I'm very confident that the U.S. government, the policy will have changed, and he'll be in. I think that's almost certain the way from what I'm hearing that by then he shouldn't have any trouble like he did a year ago. But let's just say the scenario is no Indian Wells or Miami. I don't think that's going to hurt him this year at all, because I think by having started the year, by having played all that tennis in January, and winning Adelaide and winning the Australian Open and getting all that confidence, and you can just go back and train and then start starts with the beginning of the clay court circuit, I feel like he's going to make a strong bid for Roland Garros. He's going to have decent chances to win that. He's always, I mean, he's dominated Wimbledon since 2019 and didn't get the chance to even play there in 20 because there was no tournament. And then he's overdue at the Open, in my view, with his 3 titles and not having won there since 2018 when he beat Del Potro in the final. My thought right now is to ask him to win all 3 for a Grand Slam is just not reasonable. But I do think he can get 2 of those. I'm pretty confident he'll get 1, and I think he has a better than even chance to win 2 of the remaining 3. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the way I see it is like Australian Open and Wimbledon seem like good bets for him in his column. And it's interesting actually now because it's going to be sort of like a break point. If he was able to get Roland Garros and he was able to get that break and then sort of consolidate in the Slam lead, then you're looking at 3 going into the US Open. But, I just think the calendar, the Grand Slam thing, it's just too difficult. The pressure is too big.
It is.
There's a reason why it's only been done once before, and they were.
Oh yeah, no, I'm saying that I don't see that. It was an incredible opportunity 2 years ago, and he couldn't quite pull it off. That's asking too much, but I don't think it's unrealistic that he could have another one of his 3 Slam years.
Yeah, certainly.
We saw it in 11, we saw it in 15, we saw it in 21. This could be the 4th time.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's not Nadal, he's unequivocally the second best clay court player. So,
he is. And we've seen really, I mean, look, aside from 2020 and in the recent years of his battles, obviously over time there, it was very hard in the early years to deal with Rafa on the clay, but then he had the epic semifinal with him in 13 that he probably should have won, losing 9-7 in the 5th. But looking at it in recent years, and then of course he beat him in 15, he had the great win over him in the semis 2 years ago. I think he should have been in a 5th set last year. He was 5-2 in the 4th and a couple of set points at 5-3 on his own serve. And Rafa was just too solid in the end at all 4 sets, and he won it. But I think even if Rafa is playing well again, Novak still has a pretty good crack at him. And if Rafa is not healthy and he loses to somebody else or whatever the circumstances, I would like Djokovic's chance against just about anybody. The most interesting match, of course, would be if he played Carlos.
Yeah.
Playing Carlos on the clay, there'd be a fascinating match.
Yeah, I really want to see him and Carlos play again. Since Madrid last year, they haven't met. But what is I could easily see a situation where he's playing where he's not up to form by Monte Carlo, and then sort of just building, and then by Rome and Roland Garros he's at his peak. I could easily see that, especially if he's not playing Indian Wells in Miami.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it may take him a while to gear up again, and part of that will depend on whether he's played Indian Wells in Miami. But I think the rest wouldn't hurt him. He played quite a bit, really, post U.S. Open, where he obviously couldn't compete in New York. But then after that, he took those couple of titles in the fall and lost. Then he loses in Paris to Holger Rune. Then he wins the year-end championship. Amidst it all, he played a couple of matches in Labor Cup. So there's a lot of tennis. And now 2 tournaments right off the bat over here, 12 matches. He's pretty match tough. And I feel like he won't suffer if he misses those other 2. And if he plays them, he'll be pretty confident if he's able to play them. So either way, I think he's in good shape. And actually, if he does play those 2, by the way, Vanch, I think then he might start off the clay court season a little stronger because, he'll have that many more matches under his belt. But it's going to be interesting because his history as well as I do. And when he gets on these rolls, then, his confidence just soars. And he doesn't really even think about losing. I mean, we've seen that. We saw it in 11 and 15, and it's happened again in 21. And he can pick up these majors in clusters.
Yeah. The encouraging thing for him is that I don't see any physical decline yet. I still don't see it. So that's key, because oftentimes you see players at this age, they're kind of winning on experience and mental know-how, and he's got that plus not enough physical decline nearly for the rest of the
No, he's just a little more susceptible to these understandably to some of these leg injuries. These injuries occur, but he battles through it. But in terms of movement and no, I mean, there's no sign at all on that. And so that's
Yeah.
got to be encouraging to him.
Yeah, just one other player I wanted to get a little bit more of your take on, since he did get to the final, and before we start talking about Sabalenka and Rybakina, but I think and that is Tsitsipas. I'm starting to ask myself the question, is he going to win a major in his career? Because I think this was an encouraging fortnight for him. A good now set of matches to start the year with the United Cup, and I'm encouraged a little bit about the way he's been protecting his backhand, especially which can be a weakness in his game. And he's starting to make a little bit more adjustments now, and Philippoussis in his corner, and with the whole clay season coming up, and you'd hope he'd do better at Wimbledon and the U.S. Open, because when he's in full gear, I think he's got a very good package there that can overwhelm a lot of players. So I kind of see him still getting on the board at some point. The question is just, is he going to be able to do it against Novak? I don't think so. I think he's going to have to probably wait for, Novak and Rafa to retire, but I think he'll have his moment. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely think he'll have his moment, and when you're in your mid-20s like this, he knows he's got a lot of time. He doesn't need to panic. It doesn't have to happen this year or next year. And this was still a big step in the right direction to be in a second Grand Slam final. And I think he's highly professional. I think he really wants to get better. The comments he made about Djokovic afterwards are indicative of him in the sense that he's realistic about what he's up against, but also confident and proud of what he's done, and he should be proud of what he did over there. And I mean, it's a mystery to me that he hasn't done better at the Open. It's less of a mystery at Wimbledon, but I think he can change that, and I think with some sort of re-examination of what he wants to do on his returns, to him return better on grass than he has in the past. Philippoussis can help him greatly with his grass court game. So he should start to improve at Wimbledon. We know what he can do at the French. He's going to be one of the main contenders there. Mm-hmm. And then at the Open, he's overdue. Things have kind of gone awry for him in New York for reasons that you can't fully explain. I mean, that was a bizarre loss that he had in the first round last year that nobody could understand. And he was upset about not playing at Ash, and he let things throw him. And that kind of thing just shouldn't be happening. He should be a threat at the U.S. Open anytime. So, yes, I mean, I wouldn't be too – I believe that before his career is over, we're certainly looking at a couple of majors. I don't think he's going to even settle for one. I think we're looking at least a couple, somewhere 2, 3, maybe max 4. But I think it will happen.
Yeah, that's certainly a good take. And, obviously you have that loss to Coric, 3 years ago. And I still think if he wins that match, maybe that was a heartbreaker. Maybe he could have gotten to the final there, but we'll never know. But I think the tricky thing is just whenever he plays Novak, his forehand is not the biggest weapon on the court. He's not getting much. He's not able to come to the net also a whole lot. I mean, he was 12 for 17, and Novak just does that to you with his consistent depth and his quality from the baseline. And it's just one of those matchups that are tough.
I think so. I think you said it. I think that's really it. When you break it down, and it's very hard for him to. And
the other thing is, second serve points won. I mean, Djokovic wins 62% of his second serve points in this match. It's quite a hurdle to come back from that and expect to.
Yeah, because Tsitsipas is unable to really attack Novak's second serve. Novak throws in the kicker, and then he starts off in neutral in that point. The return comes back, but not in a way that's really going to damage him very often. And then Novak takes control of the point from the baseline. And no, it's very hard. There's nowhere for him to go. And against anybody else, forehand to forehand, he's looking pretty good. Not against Novak. And I think I agree with you that there's a matchup issue there, and he plays them tight at times. And you have performances like Roland Garros 21 or the Paris indoor event last year where he comes close. But in the end, Djokovic is too good for him. And I think he kind of knows it. He's going to keep working and keep trying to solve the riddle. But I don't see him having that issue with anybody else. I mean, he did lose to Carlos last year a couple of times, and he lost to him at the 21 Open in a heartbreaker too. But I have a feeling that in that rivalry he may start to assert himself and get some wins here and there. I don't think that Carlos is going to beat. I don't see Carlos beating him every time out the way Novak has done here with the 10 in a row. So, and we've seen how he's improved against the Medvedev thing. He turned around, but you look at him against other top players too, and he can hold his own. He can hold his own with these guys, and so I think he leaves there with his head held high, and I agree with your assessment of his game. You know, when things are right, there's an awful lot of good in that game, and also probably better on the attack than most of the other guys. Djokovic doesn't give him the opportunity; other guys do, and then when he gets in, he's a very capable volleyer now.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, someone who is now capable of doing big things in this sport is Arina Sabalenka, because she must be one of the oldest 24-year-olds you've got to see, because, I mean, this has been a long time coming, I think, Steve. You know, I mean, there were signs of it at the end of last year, obviously. Pushed Swiatek, was super close to winning that match, you know, played a very encouraging World Tour finals, didn't lose that match by any stretch of the imagination, was super tight, just a couple of points in the tie break. And now you have this run. I mean, this whole year, actually, she's only lost one set, and you go to the finals against Rybakina, who's in red hot form and has just taken out this slew of Grand Slam champions along the way. And, you know, it's just one of those really, really high quality finals, one of the highest quality finals that I think matches period I've seen since, you know, maybe it's hard to even go back in time. Maybe since Brady versus Osaka at the US Open. But
yeah, probably. I think that's a good choice. Yeah, it was. And the reason it was high quality because the points are being won and not lost. They both are very aggressive from the baseline. I think Sabalenka is better from the baseline. They both served exceedingly well. And you look at it, and there are 3 breaks in the first set, and Sabalenka getting broken for the second time at 4-all. That was catastrophic for her. But then, you know, the way she served the last 2 sets, unbroken, the way she held up under
2 double
pressure.
Faults in the last 2 sets.
Yeah,
amazing.
exactly. And 7 for the matchup against compared to 17 aces was not bad either. Yeah. And the last game with the 4 deuces and needing 4 match points and fending off a break point, and she held her nerve on top of everything else. That's the one thing you didn't expect that up until now has been so suspect, as you feel like she can implode, where she did not implode in this match. She was really admirable in the way with the way she controlled her emotions. So yeah, I think it was an impressive win, because Rybakina has one of the best first serves in the game. I'm not wild about her second serve, which looks to me to be a bit too attackable with the kick. There's not quite enough bite on the kick. And a lot of the players were taking advantage of it, but the first serve is great. And she has a good, even disposition. She's got a good attitude out there. She demonstrated irrefutably that winning Wimbledon was no fluke. By getting to this final and taking Sabalenka to 3. But I love the fact that it came down to just 1 break in the second and 1 break in the third for Sabalenka. And that was it was a server's contest largely. And I like that a lot. Yet they had some decent rallies too. Not many long ones, but I did think Sabalenka defended better. I like her way she can defend out of the corners better than Rybakina. And I also think she's just a spectacular shot maker, and so she's this is going to do her a world of good, Vanch, you know, to get that burden off of her and win her first major and start the year this way. And she'll be in the thick of things in the remaining 3. And people underestimate her as a clay court player. I've watched her in the past on clay and some of those matches with Ash Barty, and she can really play on the dirt. So I don't even rule her out of winning Roland Garros, but she'll certainly be right in there at Wimbledon and the US Open. So my guess is we might get 1 more out of her this year. I think there's a decent shot that she gets 1 more. Now, the other player we should just talk about briefly before we sign off, Vanch, is Swiatek. I mean, what are your thoughts there? Here's someone who wins 37 matches in a row last year, and she's so dominant from early in the year after losing in Australia, right up through the French until she lost early at Wimbledon. And now, okay, she bounced back and won the US Open, but I haven't liked that much what I've seen since the US Open. And I'm a little concerned about her. And, you know, can the forehand stay aggressive enough? Can she make it enough of a weapon on the fast course? Will it hold up under pressure? and also just her outlook. She seems very tense at times out there, and Rybakina totally outplayed her in Australia. So I'm a little concerned. I don't see a collapse. I'm not concerned like what we were talking about with Medvedev, but I am wondering whether she's going to be able to sort of maintain this status as the best player in the world and play up to the level we started to see from her a year ago when she wins two majors. I mean, this is going to be the rest of this year is going to be very telling for her.
Yeah, I think you made some good points there. There's definitely a little bit more mental frailties. And I think there's similar type of players who are picking her off, who are, attacking her serve. And particularly, I think a lot of people make points about her second serve, but I actually don't think it's the second serve. I think it's the first serve. I don't think she gets nearly enough out of that first serve as
she doesn't.
She really can't. I mean, it's essentially just a point starter. She had the same percentage in her second serve points won as her first serve points won in that Rybakina match, and that's not great,
Oh no, that won't cut it. That won't cut it. And I've been concerned about that too. And that's another thing. First serve, I agree. Second serve still could improve. Forehand, not quite where it needs to be. Those are three serious areas of concern for her.
Yeah. And I think she's feeling the pressure as well. She was saying afterwards in her press conference that, the pressure of being the number one player in the world, and it definitely got to her. You could sense it. She was 3-love up in that second set. Yeah. She just tightened up a little bit.
It's a strange thing, Vanch. I don't understand it, because I've seen some players when they reach the summit like that and they know they worked hard to get there, and then they get there, they say, you know what, this is where I belong. I have no intention of letting go. I didn't get here by accident. I'm going to stay here, and it's going to take somebody great to wrestle this away from me. And strangely, she takes a more defensive attitude, and it's like a burden. I mean, McEnroe was more in her corner. McEnroe strangely had trouble kind of dealing with success and not terrible, but there would be time. That's why you would see McEnroe have an incredible 81 when he won Wimbledon and the Open and Davis Cup, and then doesn't win a major in 82, and then he wins only one in 83, and then he has the great 84. Season to season, you didn't necessarily know what to expect in terms of what his outlook was like. But you looked at Lendl or Connors or Sampras and other champions, and they got to the top, and they were extremely comfortable there. And I'm a little surprised in Swiatek's case that she didn't take more of an attitude of this. Look, I earned this, and I don't care if Ash Barty's not around here anymore, and I don't care if Naomi is going through a difficult stage and we don't know what's going to happen with her. I belong, and I'm the best. And she hasn't had that feeling at all.
Yeah, I think she still has time to get that feeling back, and I still would back her against anyone pretty much on the clay, because I just think she moves so well, and she's got such heavy ground strokes, and that game will just hold up a lot better, I think, on that surface.
That's the best shot. I totally agree. It's far and away her best surface, but there again, if she's feeling the pressure at Roland Garros, and she fought her way through that and past that last year. She was tight in some matches there. And I hope that that's not the case this year, because that could cost her defense of her French title too if she's too tight. So she's definitely wound up. She's definitely a very intense competitor. And I get it. She cares a lot, and it's her background, it's her pride. There's so many factors there. But I hope for her sake that she's at her best in Paris, because that's a great opportunity for her to at least get one more major out of this season.
Yeah, I'm still expecting. In general outlook, I'm not too. I still have a pretty positive outlook on her, just because she's still only 21, and she's got 3 majors in her column, and it's it's quite difficult to back up a year like she had last year. So if she can get any kind of anywhere close to that, I'd say win one slam, maybe give herself another position, maybe do a little better at Wimbledon. Maybe
Roland Garros could well be the key to everything. I mean, if she has a disappointing early round loss, or even if she lost in the quarters, that could set her on a tailspin through the rest of the year. I don't mean to the point where she doesn't stay up there in the top 3 or 4 and win some titles here and there, but it could end up costing her a chance to win any majors at all this year. So I think that what she does in Paris will be pivotal this year.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But looking forward to the rest of the rest of the year. And this was a great way to start the 2023 season. And I think we've got a lot of captivating storylines with the amount of depth that there is on both the tours and just the number of players we're going to have our eye on this year. I mean, we're in for quite a season, Steve.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. It's a really a grip, an excellent start to the year in every respect for the men and the women. And yeah, I think that there's a lot of possibilities ahead. And I like what I saw in Melbourne, and it gets me excited for the rest of 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully we can chat sooner than the French Open and we'll exchange more notes and ideas. And this was great, I think, for all of our listeners. Quite a bit of content covered in the last 75 to 90 minutes or so at such last minute. So I appreciate that a lot, Steve.
All right, Vanch, I enjoyed it, and thanks for taking the time, and we'll talk soon.
Yep. Have a good one. Thanks.
You too.